Hello and welcome to the Creative Champions Network session on revenue diversification. The journey towards financial health, which was one of our #1 voted challenges right now by the network, requires revenue generation and diversification. Both the board and leadership have a role to. Arts boards provide the strategic framework and governance for revenue diversification, while arts leadership executes these strategies, fostering innovation and partnership. Together, they ensure the organizations remain resilient and responsive to both financial challenges and opportunities. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Jacobs from Scale Collaborative. Stephanie will lead us through 9 key strategies distilled for the arts sector and that will inspire us to shift our mindsets towards innovation and positive financial culture. This session will be recorded. However, the slides will not be shared, so please feel free to take all the notes that you need. If you require ASL interpretation, please pin Keisha and Christopher so that for your viewing pleasure. Stephanie will then field questions during the Q&A period following her presentation. Let's get started. I'll pass it over to Stephanie.
Thank you, Michelle. Sorry. Thanks so much. Thanks everyone for being here today. I'm very excited. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, so I'll just take a breath. I'll introduce myself and Scale Collaborative, but I want to first start by bringing our, excuse me. Of course, a technical difficulty already. Sorry. There we go. By bringing our awareness to the place that we're calling from. So I want to bring awareness to the lands that we're each joining from. I personally live and work as an uninvited settler on the ancestral and unceded territories of the Lekwungen speaking peoples, known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations, and also the territories of the Saanich First Nations peoples. These lands are known colonially as Victoria and Saanich on Vancouver Island in BC. We take this time to acknowledge our presence on First Peoples territories as a fundamental first step in demonstrating respect, a commitment to relationship building, and active support for the rights of Indigenous peoples. There's a lot more I'd like to say on that, of course, but I'll leave it there. And I welcome each of you to share anything that you feel called to in relation to land acknowledgements or where you're joining from. You feel free to put that in the chat as we go along. Thank you. So next, I'd like to give each of us a moment to ground ourselves in today's meeting. We're all very busy people. I can imagine many of you rushed to get here or potentially have emails pinging you as I'm speaking. So let's take a moment for ourselves to collect our thoughts, take a breath, and ready ourselves for our time together in this session. Always helps me with my nerves. Okay, thanks everyone. Let's begin. So my name is Stephanie Jacobs, and I'm the program coordinator for the Thriving Nonprofits program at Scale Collaborative. I'm also a board director, and I've worked in the sector for many years as an executive director in communications, community engagement, and many other roles as well. I'm here to talk today about the possibilities for revenue diversification in the nonprofit sector. I'll be speaking for about 30 to 40 minutes, and then we can open it up for questions at the end. It's just me here today, so I won't be able to pay attention to questions that come up in the chat as I'm speaking. So if you could please just hold your questions until the end, and then we'll have lots of time to get through them. I'm going to start with sharing a little bit about Scale Collaborative and what brings me here to talk about revenue diversification. So Scale Collaborative is an organization that was founded by 3 highly experienced nonprofit leaders who were frustrated with the challenges plaguing the sector and wanted to help nonprofits to become stronger, more financially resilient, and to build capacity and increase their impact. So they took their collective experience in the charitable sector, having established innovative entrepreneurial ways to secure revenue for their own organizations, and founded Scale to support the sector through research, through social impact investing, coaching and consulting. We also run an impact co-working space here in Victoria, and they developed and we deliver the Thriving Nonprofits program, which is the foundation for what we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to speak next for a few minutes about the sector, what we're all experiencing right now, and then I'll dive into the strategies for revenue diversification that you can utilize in your organizations. So I want to talk about some fundamental stats because sometimes these realities get overlooked or forgotten about in the chaos that we can sometimes feel doing this work. A lot of the times it can feel like in nonprofits, we're sort of constantly standing with our hand out, trying to get resources that are somehow flowing through the economy over here. And we can think of ourselves as separate somehow from the economy, making money, and we're just over here hoping to access some of those resources for our work. When in reality, the nonprofit sector is a huge contributor to the economy, both local economies and our national economy. So 8.7% of Canada's GDP comes from the nonprofit sector. That's significantly more than fossil fuels. And I was just reading an interesting article on Charity Village about the arts and culture sector in Ontario specifically, which contributes $26.4 billion to Canada's culture sector GDP, which is almost half. So Ontario is contributing almost half of the entire country's culture sector GDP. The work of our sector is critically relied upon by millions of Canadians annually. It employs 2.4 million people, the majority of whom are women. And the nonprofit sector as a whole provides core social, environmental, and arts and cultural services in every single community across Canada. And despite all of this, resource constraints are a constant worry for organizations, and they're impacting our ability to do our work and meet the needs of our communities. And it's only getting worse, which is reflected in the current trends in the funding landscape of the sector. So government contracts, as I think that the arts in particular is being impacted by, government contracts have not risen on par with inflation over the past 20 years. Compounding this is the after effects of COVID-19, which I know hit the arts sector quite significantly. Inflation, economic instability, political change, all of this means that organizations are losing or are at risk of losing their government contracts. We see the number of nonprofits growing, which means higher competition for grants, as well as a shift in donor trends from the age of donors to how much and where they donate. So all of this is contributing to a decrease in resources that we can draw upon. Last year, donations across the country were down by 17%, which is a huge amount of resources not flowing into the sector. As we know, organizations are often unable to invest in themselves because contracts and grants have limitations on administration. So administration overhead supports having enough staff salaries, your technology needs, your space, and then there's higher demands on data, on utilizing tech to be able to, speak to our impact, and we don't have the resources to support that. And finally, we know that the needs of our sector are increasing and becoming more complex. So it's important to acknowledge that these trends have impact, and a lot of the challenges are the result of years of a dependent financial model that the sector has traditionally operated within. We could spend a lot more time talking about the challenges of the sector, but I want to talk a little bit more about the opportunities that we can introduce into the work that we do. And so this is a great quote that we start off with, which says that charities and nonprofits rely on three core sources of revenue: so government funding, philanthropy, and earned income. Of these three sources, only earned income offers any prospect for growth over the long term. So if earned income is the opportunity, how do we know what is possible? What are the considerations, and how do we integrate these revenues into your organizations? This is the Thriving Nonprofits Honeycomb model, which is what I work on every day. It's a broader financial model that starts to look at what's possible when many diverse revenue streams are contained with or owned by one organization. So what do we know for sure? That having many diverse revenue streams within an organization allows you to be more financially stable and focused on your core mission, whereas having a heavier reliance on grants and contracts alone, trying to cover operating expenses, can sometimes cause mission drift, especially if we're applying for grants or contracts to develop programs. And so we're developing new programs to align with the granting call that may not align necessarily with our missions. Being financially stable and focused on one core mission allows you to grow and build your resources and assets that help you plan for the future. So having assets, having growing resources, and it enables you to navigate the financial ups and downs that are sometimes beyond our control, because when one stream fluctuates, another stream is there to help balance things out, and that's key. So the key, and what we're going to be talking about, is diversification of revenue. So this is the honeycomb sort of split into two. And what we know is that most organizations are already using some or all of the more traditional revenue streams on the left-hand side, but it's the combination of both sides together that build financially strong and resilient organizations. And finding the right revenue diversification mixture is different for each organization. And historically, the nonprofit sector tends to have many limiting beliefs about money and risk that can prevent you from opening the door to the types of thinking needed to explore the opportunities for developing different types of revenue. So what we're going to talk about first is the culture of money. Before you can figure out revenue diversification, it's important to take a step back and talk about your organizational culture and beliefs about money and risk. So we're going to have a little exercise in the chat. We're going to start with money. Take a moment and think about your organizational culture and potentially any limiting beliefs that you may have about money. Ask yourself, what is the single biggest limiting belief my organization has about money? And share it in the chat box. We may notice some similarities. I'm going to keep my eye on the chat. So some examples could be things like, we shouldn't charge fees for our programs. Any type of financial risk is bad. Or, even that money will always be scarce and hard to come by. No tolerance for risk. Thanks, Diane. Well, is there more coming through? We can't increase prices every year. We're a small organization and we don't have access to a major gift donors. Financial hardship should not be a barrier. We can't invest the surplus money we have. Endowment is the only answer. We're niche with a limited audience. Yeah, a balance of free programming and needing profit. That's we're going to talk about that. Sometimes we need to respond to every complaint or concern, no matter how specific or niche. Yeah. Stakeholders are having difficult financial times too. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for engaging in the chat. Programming is contingent on fundraising targets, no or limited donors. Yeah, great. Thank you, everyone. So as we're going to explore topics like culture of money and the idea of generating profit within a nonprofit framework, which is where we're going, I also want to just pause to talk a little bit about capitalism and abundance. So at Thriving Nonprofits, we encourage nonprofits to work within the framework of capitalism to create financial resilience and abundance. And that's what we're going to be speaking about over the next 30 minutes. But at the same time, we recognize that the various systems of capitalism and colonialism have contributed to many of the social challenges that the nonprofit sector is actively trying to address. And capitalism and the accumulation of individual wealth are not long-term solutions for building a society rooted in equity, respect, social justice, environmental stewardship, or reconciliation with Indigenous people. And in the arts sector in particular, it's often the artists who hold us accountable, who can imagine alternatives and advocate for a better system. So I really understand and respect that what we're going to talk about next can challenge beliefs and create tension. But the reality is we don't have a perfect alternative. So as nonprofit leaders, as art sector leaders, we sometimes have to use the economic tools available to us to generate the resources we need to support our work. And the fundamental goal of revenue diversification and working within a more business or entrepreneurial framework is to increase the unrestricted revenues that we need to support our staff, to grow programs and services, and be able to increase your impact in the communities that you serve. So, with all of that said, can you try to reframe your limiting belief into an empowering belief? Can we start to shift the way we think about money and risk to support the diversification of our revenue streams and access profit within a nonprofit context? So using the same examples of before, could you say, instead of we can't charge fees for our programs or services, it might become we can charge fees while still ensuring our programs remain accessible? Or any type of financial risk is bad, to we can take smart, calculated risks to test out new ideas that can bring in new resources. Our expertise and excellence deserves market pricing. Anyone else? We can and should reevaluate pricing annually. Thanks, Heather. How can it feel to shift, even in this theoretical context of a Zoom chat room discussion, how can it feel to give yourself permission to reevaluate limiting beliefs about money? I'll just give everyone another minute to think about that. Add it to the chat. Aiming for a surplus gives our organizations a better shot at sticking around to solve problems. Absolutely. Our staff deserve raises. Yes. It's really important to support our staff. Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. So challenging sometimes long-held beliefs is how you can start to have a conversation within your organization to change the culture of money. Okay, coming back to the Thriving Nonprofits Honeycomb, we're going to use it to help set the stage for bringing in financial sustainability. So when you begin to think about diversifying, an important exercise is to look at the current state of your revenue on each of these streams. Where is your dependency and where might there be opportunities for growth? This helps you to understand the gaps and potential pathways you'd like to move towards in the future to be more in control. And I just want to be clear that grants and contracts are always going to be critical. They're a part of our, revenue plan, and they will remain so. But it's important to consider what the right mix of both traditional and earned income strategies will be to promote financial sustainability within your organization, to serve your mission well, and allow for a sufficient level of organizational independence. So we're going to focus our time today on the more untraditional strategies that are on the right-hand side of the honeycomb and talk about them and how give some examples and some support to get you talking about these within your organization. It's very high level. We just want to get you thinking about what's possible. So a good place to start when looking to increase income for your organization is to look at charging fees for the programs and services that you're already offering, the potential of servicing a new paying market with the same need, or introducing a new program or service with a fee attached. And I can appreciate that many nonprofits struggle with the idea of setting prices for their programs or services, or with increasing prices to match the current economic realities that we face, especially if you haven't charged fees or raised fees in a long time. So for many, it can be quite a psychological challenge and have tension within your organization to be able to meet the needs of the people that you serve, to create accessible programs while still recognizing that there are fees attached to those programs. It's important to talk about the considerations that you would have within your organization when you're charging or increasing fees. How can you charge fees and protect your values? And so we want to explore topics like the culture of money and generating profit within a nonprofit, and bring that back to your team to talk about, what are the values that you hold? How do you protect those? But also begin to think about, charging or increasing fees for your programs. You want to have open communication with this about with your staff. It enables you to help others understand that the goal in charging fees is to increase the impact that you can have. And we've seen lots of examples where organizations have increased their programs or services impact by actually charging fees that didn't create a barrier to participate. So a great example is, if you're offering a show or a concert or a workshop for free, that doesn't always end up creating the same level of buy-in and value to the recipient as if you charge a nominal fee, $5 or $10. There's suddenly now a commitment that has been made to showing up for that program or service. And there's a value attached to it that the person who's interested in paying that $5 or $10 has, it's a relationship that's been built. The differentiation between free and pay what you can. Yeah, thank you. And then there's also, there's accessibility concerns. And so that's exactly right. There's, lots of different ways in which you can introduce fees that promote accessibility while still acknowledging that there are fees to run your programs. So pay what you can, sliding scale, providing people the opportunity to pay more when they have the means and resources to do so. There's lots of ways to be able to introduce fee for service into your programs. And then it also can bring up concerns about reputation and about how your organization is perceived by the community and its partners or funders. So again, just being open and transparent on the benefits of the impact that you can have and challenge that belief. And there may be other reasons why the idea of charging fees for programs and services could make you feel uncomfortable. Communication's key, bringing that back to your team, to your board, having a conversation, brainstorming ideas, helping you understand the link between the revenue that you bring and the greater impact it enables. It can be really powerful because ultimately someone has to pay and nothing's free. And so if you're charging, small fees that don't reflect the cost of programming or charging no fees, then your existing funding is not covering the whole cost of delivering the program or service that you offer, and your organization is the one that pays. And so having our organizations cover these costs or do without is very common in the sector, and that looks like staff who are undervalued, who are not earning as much as you'd like to be providing them. It looks like our artistic directors or executive directors wearing many hats, working many hours, lack of benefits, lack of pay raises, all of these ways that things show up. And so there's lots of ways that you can explore charging fees while ensuring that you protect your organization's values. And this is a great slide that shows a number of them. There's 8 different fee strategies on this slide, so you're welcome to take notes. I'll just pause here for a moment. And there's more options in this as well. These are just sort of the primary ones that we see and talk about when we bring organizations in to help them diversify their revenues. Give your team to strategize on fee for service. Go through these ideas, talk about what they might look like, which ones are you already doing, how can you improve, and that will really set you on the path to thinking more deeply about how you can integrate fees into your programs and services. All right, next we're going to talk about social enterprise. It's another strategy that nonprofits and charities can consider as an opportunity for earned income. A social enterprise sells goods or services. They can achieve social, cultural, or environmental impact, and then reinvest the majority of those profits into achieving their missions. So these are businesses that offer programs or services at market rates with the intention of generating profit above and beyond expenses and reinvesting that profit back into the nonprofit mission. They use a business model to earn revenue and also achieve their impact goals, and they can be as varied as a mix and match of goals and businesses can be. So they don't necessarily have to be directly aligned with your program. They can be things like a cafe, a thrift store. Another great example that is aligned with the arts organizations is a company that had a bunch of equipment, like theater equipment, recording equipment. They were very well known as having like the just this incredible supply of equipment, and they didn't. It was just sitting there when they weren't using it, and so they established a business as a equipment rental company, enabling them to access additional revenue outside of their programs and services and charge market rates for that equipment rental. Social enterprises can take many forms. They can exist within an organization. They can be an organization itself. So for example, a youth drama school would be a great example of a social enterprise. And they can be a for-profit business that's owned by a nonprofit or charity. And if you're thinking about social enterprise, you want to develop your plan to include the required capital, capacity, and time to succeed. This is a very complex strategy, but it is one of the most impactful ways to begin generating profit to reinvest back into your nonprofit mission. So in Thriving Nonprofits, we suggest organizations take a testing and iteration process instead of doing all the work and paying all those costs to launch a social enterprise up front. So you think about testing and creating ideas. If you're starting a social enterprise from startup, how can you start small? Test with a small market, get feedback, integrate that feedback into your plans, try again until you know that you have something that's working, and then you expand. Sorry. Another thing that I want to add about social enterprise is that you can ask yourself the question, should we start a social enterprise or buy a business and shift it into a social enterprise? So when you look at the types of social enterprises that organizations generally want to start, many are main street businesses that you would expect to see in most communities. And if your organization's main goal for social enterprise is to create revenue to support your mission, or if you can embed the impact you want to achieve inside an existing business model, then there may be potential in the market to acquire an existing business and convert it into a social enterprise to support your organization. This means that you bypass the startup phase. And so you're walking into a business that has an established customer base that can show its revenue and expenses, its profits over the past number of years. And that gives you a leg up in developing social enterprise revenue a lot quicker. And in Canada right now, there are a number of baby boomers that are retiring without succession plans for these sort of small to medium-sized local businesses. And so the opportunity to purchase a business and embed social impact is really worth considering at this time and place. It's quite a unique time in the local economy. The next revenue strategy I want to talk about is assets. So these can be both simple and more complex. Yes, thank you, Heather. So definitely you can own a business as a charity, but there are regulations. And so you want to be working, with a lawyer if you're going to go through the process of purchasing a social enterprise or starting one. You just want to make sure that you are getting advice, legal advice, and working with CRA for related or unrelated business activities. There are regulations in place, but it is certainly possible. Thanks for bringing that up, though. Okay, so assets. Assets are generally thought of as financial items that show up on your organization's balance sheet, but there's lots of important assets both inside and outside of your organization that don't show up on your balance sheet that you can consider when you're talking about diversifying your revenue streams. So you want to think about assets that hold not just economic value, but also social value, cultural value, natural or ecological value, and community value. This invites a much broader perspective and provides you with a new way to look at what your organizational assets might be. So the assets that come to mind when you begin to apply this broader perspective, and we've seen lots of organizations begin to monetize these examples. So for example, there's your space, your networks, your brand and goodwill. If you have waste streams, and your tools and equipment. So I gave that example earlier of the organization that was able to generate revenue from the equipment that they already had just sitting in their warehouse when they weren't using it. So let's just check back in with everybody. Can you think of an asset that your organization might have that is maybe underutilized at this time? Do you have space that's sitting empty sometimes? Do you have films? Do you have, thanks, Chelsea. Do you have expertise that other people might value, that might have a monetary value? Space, programming space, an archive, a box office, specialized theater lights. Nice, yeah. Music library, experience, lots of assets. We had another organization come through the program that was a symphony, and they had a huge archive of the filmed recordings of large symphony performances, and they decided to start utilizing the recordings that they had to build an additional revenue stream outside of their live concerts. Relationships, skilled staff, expertise. Thanks, everyone. It's nice to know I'm not alone. Live streaming. Sharing networks around privacy legislation, yes. Yeah, you can't sell your lists, but you can think of those as networks that you can utilize. We wouldn't be talking about selling our networks to other people, but you can certainly be leveraging your networks to help build out, something else that you might want to be working on, your brand, your reach. If you have expertise and you want to leverage your network to be able to get your expertise out into the world, things like that. Cross-sector partnerships. Yeah, absolutely, Anna. Thank you. Which brings us into our next one, which is partnerships. So I have a feeling that many of you already use partnerships as a way of doing work or bringing in financial resources. Partnerships are very valuable in this sector. Maybe just raise your hand or put a little smiley face in the chat if you're already using partnerships as a resource stream. Smiley face. Thanks, Chelsea. Thanks, Megan. So organizations benefit from partnerships, from growing partnerships, from deeper partnerships that can bring in new revenue and resources. There are both financial partnerships and also an ability to create collaborative partnerships, such as for distribution channels, advertising, for example. There's lots of different ways to integrate partnerships into the work that we do. So we encourage organizations to think about partnerships that are more than sort of, can we have $5,000 to sponsor this event? And we'll put your organization, your company's name on our program, which is still valuable, of course. But how can we work to deepen those partnerships to create ongoing relationships and ongoing value? So you might have a partnership with another nonprofit, a business, or a high net worth individual, and your partnerships may range in complexity from fairly straightforward to deep, multi-year agreements. And the most important thing that we want to stress when we're talking about partnerships, and this goes back to challenging the traditional culture of the sector, is that your nonprofit, your organization offers several important values to potential partners. So a lot of times the partnerships, it can feel like, when we're going out to find sponsorships for an event, it's sort of a one-way agreement where, you put your name on the program, but ultimately like we're going out and we're asking for money. And really what we try to instill in organizations is that there is deep, deep value to the work that we do and the impact that it has in the sector. So, talking about the arts sector, people want to live in a society that has cultural and artistic expression. It's really important in terms of, the world in which we live. And so, you are contributing to that cultural fabric that people want to be a part of, even business people. And so it's really important to remember that and to understand your value when you're going and, creating partnerships, working on introductions, speaking about your organization. And so I'd maybe just invite everyone again to pop in the chat, something that is really valuable about the work that you do. I know that audience reach, composition. Thanks, Heather. Give people voices and a safe place to express themselves. Thanks, Chelsea. Preserve history. Thanks, Dawn. One more. Support Indigenous and cultural communities. Absolutely. Thank you. A dedicated creative space, real world experience, encourage emerging voices and composers. Give young people a chance to learn about themselves through music, movement, and storytelling. Thanks, everyone. That feels good. So this is another exercise that I would invite you to take back to your team, to your board, to go through the process of generating your list of values, not the values that you hold internally, but also the values that you bring to the sector to the communities that you serve, to the larger community, and then begin to think about who might be a good partner that also has that value, who has a shared goal or a shared objective or aligns with what you are trying to achieve that may be operating in the private or philanthropic space. Do that brainstorming, and that's going to be the foundation for working on building these longer, more relationship-based win-win partnerships. So to pursue successful partnerships, your organization will need to understand how to do 4 key things. The first one is knowing your value, understanding your brand and your reach. And this is going to help you figure out a right partnership, a good fit, and help you demonstrate the benefits of partnering with your organization. So as you're doing outreach and you're creating opportunities to meet with potential partners, you really need to be able to articulate the value that you bring to the partnership that you are trying to establish with them. You want to identify the right partnership alignment. So making sure that you're finding partners that are going to align with your mission, what makes sense for your organization. You want to craft your effective value proposition. So as I was saying, being able to articulate your value, you want to put that into writing. You want to make sure that you can say that, you can point to it very quickly. A lot of times we use the phrase like 60-second elevator pitch. And you want to make sure that everyone in your organization and everyone on your board is aligned in being able to communicate the same message. And then you want to negotiate and manage successful partnerships. So negotiations come from, creating positive associations, from starting small. So we're not just calling people and saying, hey, do you want to partner and give me hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's about liking someone on LinkedIn, reaching out slowly, asking them about themselves, about their values. People want to build relationships, and you really need to separate away from this idea of a transactional relationship and more of an authentic, human-focused relationship. And that's going to really support long-lasting, deep-held partnerships. Okay. The last revenue strategy that we're going to talk about today is leverage. And this is sort of a broad term that can cover a lot of ground. And so I'm going to speak a little bit more specifically in terms of how you can leverage your operations to be able to drive more impact through the work that you're doing. So if you think about all the aspects of your organization, you want to think about things like your HR policies, your operations, what you purchase, who you bank with, any investments you might have, and how you can align those with the mission that you're trying to achieve in the world. So how can you align the dollars that you're already spending towards increasing impact? When all of our activities and operations are aligned towards impact, you can contribute further to solving the problems that we're hoping to address and help to increase the strength of the sector as a whole. So for some examples, somebody mentioned providing a space for youth. When we talk about HR policies, do we have a youth employment strategy as part of the work that we do? A small example is things like pay equity. Pay equity is not a small example, but a small example would be posting salary information. If you're hiring new staff, we know that there are, by posting salary, it removes the necessity to negotiate. And we know that women and people of color generally do not press as hard during salary negotiations. And so we want to be able to remove that barrier. And that's just a very small example of something that is a really big issue. Can we be living wage employers? Can we articulate the need to be a living wage employer when we're talking about partnerships or to our funders or donors? This is something else that, it's a real struggle in this sector to be a living wage employer, but we want to find ways to align that with the work that we're doing. And then just finally, if you're hosting events, if you're hosting a fundraising event, can you procure the services that you need from other local businesses, from other social enterprises or nonprofits in the community? How can you circulate the money that you're spending back into the community that you're serving? Using credit unions rather than banks. Absolutely, that's a fantastic example. All right. I just have a few more slides to go through, and then we'll pause and have time for questions. The next thing that you need to do after we've gone through these, 9 potential opportunities is to figure out which ones are going to suit you best. And so that's what that's something that you're going to bring back to your board and your team. I'm hopeful that this webinar will provide a jumping off point for conversation within your organization to begin to look, as I said in the beginning, at your current state. So really understanding where you are right now within this honeycomb, where your reliance is, where there are potential risks associated with that, and what the opportunities are for you. Things that you want to consider are time. So are you looking to develop a plan or a strategy for increased resources that is in the short term, the medium term, or the long term? What is your organizational culture towards risk and about money? Do you have any limiting beliefs that are going to impact your ability to develop new revenue streams? And how do you begin to shift that thinking? Your risk and return. So, get together and talk about all the potential ideas you might have, and then, relate those back to varying levels of risk and return. What are the easy ideas that won't take too much time to implement? How could you do them now? What are the small steps to building your risk appetite towards implementing some of these bigger strategies we've talked about, like, for example, social enterprise? And what are the current strengths and resources that your organization has concerning each strategy? What is within your capacity at this current time? If you need to grow capacity to get there, what are the steps that you need to take to grow capacity? It might be using your board to help foster additional partnerships, and those partnerships might support the vision for the launch of a social enterprise that will then create greater impact for the goal that partner is also having. So it's really about figuring out the steps that you need to take relative to the different strategies that we're talking about. And how can you surround yourself with others who are figuring this out or working to achieve similar goals, or maybe who have implemented revenue diversification successfully and want to be there to support you? Okay. Whew. 2 more slides. That was a lot of information. I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. I'm hopeful that you were able to get some good tidbits of information. And then I'm hoping that you can take this back to your organization. So I just want to share briefly that, the work that I do is to take this information, and I run a program that enables organizations to come in and receive walk beside support to be able to take a look at all of these strategies and work on which ones are going to be best suited for their organization. So we run 2 different models of that program. It's called the Thriving Nonprofits Program. It was developed in 2016, and we've run it to over 400 organizations at this point. We just wrapped a completely arts sector cohort, which was really fun. And so the applications are currently open for our cohort model, which is brings in 3 members of your organization. We have 8 modules where we go over each strategy in detail. We talk about them relative to your organization. You receive individualized coaching, and at the end, you come out of it with your revenue diversification action plan. The applications are currently open for the spring cohort, and we try very hard to support through bursaries with partners that we develop. And so I would invite you to reach out if you're interested in learning more or to apply for the cohort program. And then we also offer our program as a self-paced online model, which you can access at your own time. You have access to for a year. It goes through all of the steps as well. It's just, on your own instead of in a cohort. You still come out with a revenue diversification action plan. And that program, we're offering a 50% coupon for everybody who's here today if you want to take these learnings back to your team and begin working through the course to try to align them specifically to the needs of your own organization. And that is me. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Stephanie. I think what I'll do is I'll keep an eye on we can both keep an eye on the chat, but maybe if Alexandra as well as Liz can also, in case we lose some questions as the chat scrolls.
Absolutely, yes. So I just see a question from Jerry. You use the phrase living wage employer, expand, please. So, I think even citywide, it's not provincial wide, it's citywide. A living wage is the set wage that is determined that you need to be making to be able to live, to be able to afford rent and basic necessities. So it's generally above minimum wage significantly. Where I live, it's $25 an hour right now, announced on November 18th, I believe, at least for the GTA. Yeah, thanks, Ann. Yes, by city. Yeah. So it's a wage that's set to reflect the cost of living as opposed to minimum wage.
And that changes generally annually.
I believe so. Question.
You can use the Q&A function. I'm looking at both. So whatever is easiest for everyone.
Yeah, Jason, you're absolutely right. I agree with you that there are challenges within how the government currently allocates subsidies and resources. Absolutely. But, as I said at the beginning, we may have beliefs about what we think should happen, and they may not necessarily reflect the current state that we're facing. And so what we're trying to achieve is opening up those long-held beliefs. The arts sector in particular has relied on government funding primarily for many, many, many years. And that came, a lot of organizations that I've worked with have been around since, the 20s, 30s, 40s, when there was not nearly as many people, the time, society was completely different. Government funding was completely different. Things have really changed. And so why I completely agree with you, there is also the need to, work towards being able to access the resources that we need to support our teams, support our work and do the work in communities, because we may believe and want something from government. And as the government changes next year, which is I'm holding we're all, I think, on bated breath about what's going to happen next year. We may see, increased risks to the funding landscape for nonprofits and for the arts sector.
And maybe just to add to that, Stephanie, if this is okay, is
please,
if you've had the opportunity to read Michelle Chawla of the Canada Council for the Arts and really about building what that case for support is and a cohesive narrative from the sector to come forward to advocate as well as to make that case for more funding, whether it's through public, private, and really take control. I urge you to read that, and this is another way. It may not just be about revenue diversification, but building a stronger sector together. And that also supports the financial health of our organizations and the sector as a whole. So we all have a role to play in that conversation at the government level.
Absolutely. And Canada Council for the Arts is a partner of ours. So the sector the cohort that just wrapped in the summer was a CCA partnered cohort. Have the artists been paid buttons used to be a favorite swag item? Yeah.
Huh.
Could go towards enhancing the compensation for our artists. Yeah, absolutely. What do people think about the idea of, even just something like profit in a nonprofit? How does that resonate with you?
I love it personally.
Necessary. Yeah, it's shifting the idea around what profit is. Profit at its core just means an excess of revenue over expense. There are value sets that can go along with profit. So we're not talking about profit that goes to line the pockets of shareholders. We're talking about excess of revenue over expense that can be reinvested into the work that we're doing. Call it a surplus. Great. Necessary and uncomfortable. Around charging artists when we have always been free. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a real concern. And so, you have to think about who else might benefit from the work that you're doing, who benefits from a robust arts sector in your community. It's not just artists. We want artists to benefit, absolutely. But we all benefit. And so it's about finding other partners, other people. Like I said, the Canada Council for the Arts was just sponsoring a cohort because they benefit from organizations that have more skills around revenue diversification, and reduces the reliance on core grant funding, which then enables more organizations to access that pool of funding. And so they were able to partner with us to support organizations to access our program. And so it's really thinking about who do you know, what do they value? It's not necessarily just charging your artists.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. We're at about a minute to the end of our session. So I would like to let people go if they need to and sort of close off the formal session of this webinar. But I will stay on for an additional 10 minutes if there's other questions that come up. What spoke to me, I think the most, my own takeaways is really that if we look ahead, earned revenue really offers the only prospect for growth. I think that's a very, very big provocation. Um, I think I want people to take that away because what it does is bring our own financial health into our own control. And we need to exercise our responsibility to ensure that our organizations are going to continue to thrive and be sustainable. And that is also, not subject to whatever the next election is going to be and to be able to do that planning. And I also love, your instruction to really go back as an organization, board, staff, leadership, everyone to come together, have these conversations, be creative, because sometimes we are a creative industry, but we're not always creative in our strategies. So let's do that together. We all bring perspectives based on where we sit in an organization. So let's do that work together. I want to thank everyone for attending today. Um, we will be sending out this recording along with some resources as well as Stephanie's amazing offer if you'd like to participate in the program. And we will also be sending out a survey for this session. Please complete it so it really helps us with planning for our future. I also want to thank our interpreters, Keisha and Christopher, and the foundation staff for their coordination of this event. Our next session will be on January 30th. This session is also virtual, and it will build on this specific topic, but with a very catered conversation on the future of philanthropy. And we will be confirming our speakers over the next couple weeks, and registration will open shortly, and you will receive an email from us very soon on that. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you to Stephanie, and have a great day, and hope you have great conversations at your organizations moving forward.